Welcome back, everyone. I'm happy to present you with the second episode of the new 5B1C series. And if you're not familiar with 5B1C, it is 5 builders, 1 city, meaning it is a multiplayer way of playing through City Skylines. And as it stands, 6 builders will actually get the opportunity to help build in the city, plus some guest builders will be joining us, and it is a fantastic roster. If you haven't checked it out, I'll put some information in the description below. But Zardis has already kicked us off, and he built a European city on this side of the river. So what you're going to be seeing today is actually the North American start on the opposite side of the river. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button. Please like the video and drop a comment down below with your thoughts on the build, any suggestions you have for future episodes of 5B1C. Now, this is actually season 4 of 5B1C. This started in Cities 1, and this is the first season to take place in Cities 2, which is pretty exciting. This is actually the second time that I've been involved with the 5B1C series, which is pretty amazing. And I'm not sure if this has been done before where we've built in 2 different themes. So some builders will be taking the North American theme, like myself, and then some folks will be using the European theme. For example, Zardis, and coming up next will be Teddy Radko. So if you watched the previous episode by Zardis, you've probably seen his European town, and you've seen how organic it is in terms of its structure, its design. I want to do something that counters that, and in the typical North American style, which I tend to build in, I wanted to do a grid. But this is going to take a little bit of work. We have this kind of uneven terrain I'm trying to decide how to deal with. First, I wanted to do a seawall, but I've done a seawall in a couple cities now, and sometimes they just look a little bit funky. They look a little bit too tall. So then I thought we'd end up with a more natural coastline, maybe put some row houses or something like that closer to the water with some pedestrian pathing. And then I wanted to set up our North American grid to be a little bit different. Instead of just following the coastline, I wanted it to extend back away from the coastline at an angle. And that's what you can see me constructing here is going to be the starting point for that grid. This road with the fill beneath it is meant to serve as one of the main avenues for the city. It's also going to serve as a little bit of a terrace, and I'm basically trying to find a way to break up some of the changes in terrain a little bit more in a manufactured way versus an organic way. Something I don't use enough is the grid tool. I don't know how many of you folks have started to utilize this to help you with, just setting up basic downtowns. Of course, we do have some small grid breaks here, but it's not too bad. At least it's a little bit even. And then from this point, we can start to extend it into some of the infrastructure I'm going to set up around it. Now, one big challenge we have today is we also have to connect this to the highway system, which is not something that I'm great at. I can tend to manage, but you'll have to bear with me if it feels a little bit rudimentary or if it just doesn't seem as smooth as it needs to be. Hopefully someone can go in and clean up some of my angles and stuff like that, maybe make it a little more polished. So what I envision is an extra terrace here, and then we're going to probably start using more natural progression of roads up this hill, up these slopes. So you'll start to see things just broken down into tiers without these fill roads to cover up that height change. I also want to put a road underneath this that serves as a little bit of a barrier on the lower side, right up against the wall. And everything else short of the wall is actually going to be basically gridded, and I may actually try to find ways of altering the grid format a little bit and throwing some different angles in at some point. The juxtaposition of this against what Zardis has done should be pretty interesting. I think it's going to look really unique in a way. And I'm excited to see how this plays out as a couple more builders get their hands on the save file and start to extend the city in different areas on both sides of the river. I still wish we had things like beach textures and stuff like that to make our coastline look a little bit different than it does. I think it'd be nice to have a little bit more sand or something along those lines. I may have to talk and see if the other folks want to add dev mode in so that we have a little bit more detailing as an option for what we're doing, but I guess we'll see how we can make it work. I think a lot of the coastline here is going to end up being almost like park space and maybe just a few row homes closer to the water. And with some work and altering where some of the grids land and stuff like that, we can get to a point where I think we have a nice little infrastructure for a downtown area. Obviously, the height changes are going to present problems sort of connecting them and interconnecting them so that you don't run into too many traffic issues, although I sort of expect it to some degree that we are going to have a little bit of a traffic problem. That's just sort of the nature of it at times, but hopefully this will be suitable at least to start off with. And I can imagine that if we get another turn and we get in here, we may make some more definitive changes with, some of the new road options that'll become available as we begin to level up and hit our milestones. And then not to mention, we do have, some transit options as well we can incorporate later down the road. Now in this lower area, I totally intend to include some medium density residential and some mixed use. And then hopefully as the city progresses later down, we can start adding in things like high density commercial into some of that, along with maybe some high density residential or offices. Maybe this will be the downtown that sort of really raises up, and gets kind of tall. I'd be kind of interested to see where this lands, but I do know that there are going to be some things with demand that are going to throw me off, at least at the start of the city. We do have quite a bit of demand right now, but once I started laying down zones, that demand was eaten up pretty quickly. Some of that's because we are building basically 2 cities, but the demand is working in such a way that if Zardis has availability for housing and stuff like that, it's actually eating into some of that demand. So you'll notice that I'm going to have to kind of skip and make some edits here to show a little bit more passage of time, because I ran into an issue where demand was quickly eaten up and my side of the city just wasn't growing because a lot of those folks were still, capable of moving in something that was already developed. And some of what I'm going to do by the end of the episode is also setting the city up for success, even more success, as it continues to progress through different builders. Like, we're going to try to get our education in a spot where it's going to provide the opportunity for Sims to go get some better jobs and really push office demand in the long run. So when I'm zooming out, you can obviously see the juxtaposition between the different cities and the layouts and how that's going to work. We're going to go ahead and open up a path to get to our highway system so that we can bring Sims into my portion of the city via that highway. And this is going to take 2 interchanges, one at the highway and then one here to dump people off. And then I'm going to set up an expansion point so that people want to continue the highway further, they can, and they can build what they would like. Now, because we do have to connect our highway system, I do need to unlock it. And with that, we're also going to get advanced road services. Pretty normal setup for the early part of your city anyway. So I'm going to set up a piece of highway that's going to connect the current existing highway over here to our downtown area. Now, I'm going to tie those highways together utilizing a trumpet interchange, and our highways will run sort of parallel with the railroad. And then closer to the downtown, I'm going to put a single point interchange in that'll be just on the north side between the railroad and the downtown infrastructure we've already set up. It's interesting to be in this position of having to sort of set up a lot more of the infrastructure beyond just the downtown area for me, because that's just, again, never been something I've really focused on. Most of my background, especially with Cities 1, is detailing, and that's really not something you can do much of in CS2. So that's created a little bit of a challenge to kind of adjust how I play. My play style in general has changed a little bit to accommodate what Cities 2 will allow. One thing that's kind of bugged me about road design in Cities 2, though, is the fact that you have so many overlap indications that pop up pretty much with everything you do, but for some reason, there's just times where I'm like, come on, let me just place it. And thankfully, we have mods slowly making their way into the world. And I would hope that as time passes, we'll be able to negate some of these overlap indications, because they just slow things down a little bit. And then you, of course, have some of the intuitiveness of Cities 2, throwing you off at times. Stuff happens. Oh, well. It's interesting to me, and I've talked about this more than once, is like the intuitiveness of Cities 2 is nice, but at the same time, like, you lack a chunk of control over some of the things that are happening, or some of the things that you may want to do. You don't have that control because it's looking at so much data or information around snapping, for example, that it begins to limit you. It's an interesting world. But what's often interesting about 5B1C when you're setting up infrastructure like this is just seeing where things go over time, because builders are going to have certain areas that they want to focus on, or certain things that they want to build. You factor in guest builders that may also add a bunch of things to our cities and continue to develop them far beyond what maybe just a couple of the builders have seen. So I'm really excited to see how this pans out within this game, in this format, because I think there's a ton of things that could happen, especially with how big the cities kind of feel, the scaling and stuff. I'm very curious to see how many folks, continue the builds that were started versus building their own town or own space somewhere, around or in between. And to some capacity, I think we'll be able to give Cities 2 a little bit of a run for its money in terms of how performance is going to operate. Obviously, Colossal Order is working on performance, but it'll be fun to see how big our population gets, later in the season, or how much is really going to be incorporated if everyone's building some form of town or city or something like that, or just expanding what we have. It's a lot of builders, so it keeps the energy up to keep growing it and seeing where it can go. So I'm kind of excited to see how it operates, a couple turns in, and what we get out of this space. I realize too, it's going to take a little bit before we get into some of the zoning of the downtown area. I'm going to set this up, then we're going to work on the single point urban interchange closer to the city, try to get that down, and then we'll start actually putting some zones in. That's when you'll see a little bit of the issues that I was talking about in terms of demand. Once I started adding stuff, I quickly noticed that there seemed to be a pretty hefty and strong demand for industrial, almost like it wasn't really truthful in terms of what the demand was. It was more significant than that. So we have to sort of accommodate that and start working towards getting the city caught up almost in a way. That way we can get some of the residential demand up enough that our side of the city starts to grow a little more rapidly. But this took a little bit of experimentation and some time to sort of get it to be where it needed to be to see the city growth that I wanted to see on my side of the river. So with some cleanup, I finished up the trumpet. It looks all right. I think some of the curves are not maybe as ideal as I would like them to be, but I was able to fix some of where the lanes are merging and the exit and entrance ramps are connecting, and it came out okay. And now we are going to start the single point here, and I'm going to have the main artery that runs into downtown actually beneath the highway system, which is certainly a choice. I'm going to have to obviously alter the terrain a little bit to accommodate that road, and that road will lift up after it crosses beneath this highway system. Then I'll have to factor in the railroad, which we'll need to unlock a little bit later so that we can make adjustments there as well. But I kind of expect that to get altered probably more than once as we start to figure out how some of this area is going to look. In retrospect, one thing that kind of bothered me after I did all this was that I did have the highway dipping a little bit towards the city. I thought the organic shape would be good and give us a little bit more room between this and the railroad. But then, like I said, I probably would move the railroad, and I think I end up doing that later in the episode. And I shifted a little bit more north to accommodate more room for the road to go upward. And I don't know, I guess in the long run, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not sure if it looks bad or if it just looks like it's kind of unnecessary. Ultimately, I guess you could blame some of the terrain too, because we're sort of playing on a couple different heights here to make all this work. But it might be an interesting science project to see how we can bend the entrance and exit ramps to sort of match that curvature to some degree. I just don't know if it'll make sense. Maybe with some trees and stuff like that. Like when this is all filled up, it'll probably look a little bit better than it just being sort of empty. Because obviously right now it may not seem like that curvature has a lot of purpose. Like what is it working around? But we could build in areas or set up the terrain, stuff like that, to make it seem like the highway was built around something or curving because of something. I guess that's what I'm looking for, is just intent or purpose behind what we're trying to set up here. So I found there's a couple things that tend to help me set this up. And first of all, it's, you want some sort of symmetry to how you build this, right? Just at least for aesthetics. So I tend to try to build certain things to mirror each other to make it a little bit easier to keep track of some of the numbers. Part of me wishes we had the legacy flavors mod just so I had units instead of having to do the meter adjustments and stuff like that, just to make it a little more simplified. But I try to set it up where I can easily just sort of match things. So if you see me just jumping back and forth to either side, it's because I just want it to be as close to one another in terms of the scale. And I'm measuring as well to see how many meters some of these roads are going to be, and then copying it on either end or either side or whatever it takes to make it all sort of blend together and look as clean as possible. Because again, this is not necessarily something that I am super well versed in. I'll also sometimes add roads that intersect some of the roads I'm trying to set up in order to create additional nodes, similar to something you might have done in early Cities 1 before things like, node control or network multi-tool were there, right? So I can help, control the segment size and stuff like that a little bit more efficiently. Because there's nothing like setting up a road and then having to delete the road when you need to make a small adjustment. That happens. I think we've all had it happen, and I'm trying to avoid that. But I'm going to go ahead and basically mark where I expect these entrance and off ramps to actually split to create the single point. One of the first interchanges I actually tried in Cities 2 when I was working on Cedarburg, my series, it's a little bit of a Let's Play / learner series, was this type of interchange. And I had a lot of fun trying to figure it out. Although it's a little bit, I don't know, it's not really complicated as much as just trying to figure out how to utilize some of the new tools. I think it slowed me down a little bit. And once I got it set up, I was pretty pleased with how it came out, especially having the road beneath. I know some folks prefer the road above, but I liked how this ended up working out in Cedarburg. So I figured we'll try it here and see how it works. Although sometimes traffic doesn't always operate as well using this, but I also think that Cities 2 has one of the same issues that Cities 1 has, where you just have these influxes of people that can back up your system. And I don't always see the most intuitive AI sense in terms of how they decide where they're going and stuff like that. Like they're switching lanes abruptly, just like we're accustomed to, which can kind of slow the functionality of this down. But overall, I think this came out pretty well. There will be, at the very end of the episode, you might notice some traffic flow issues here. I was able to clean some of that up before passing off the save, but what I did notice is that it seemed to be tied to a pretty huge influx, because as we fix demand later in the episode and start really adding some of our residential in, you'll see sort of a surge in terms of the buildings and everything like that in the downtown area. It also just brought on a ton of people at once, which backed up this whole system. Now, I'm very curious to see, again, if people extend off of this highway that I've set up and begin to build a little bit further downriver, like what that'll create in terms of traffic in this area. Maybe it'll spread it out, because I also feel like someone could add more interchanges between both of the interchanges I've set up, and then you would have probably a lot more traffic flowing throughout this sort of coast area against the river. And I think that would ultimately balance things out over here a little bit more. I don't think I should use a roundabout though anywhere here, because obviously we're going for that North American theme. We'll have plenty of roundabouts across the river, but we'll see how it all works out. So in typical North American fashion, I'm going to go ahead and put a water tower here next to the highway. It's sort of an announcement that you're coming into town. And then we're going to actually tie our sewage system into what's already existing. I'm doing this because I'm a little bit worried about where we place that right now. I don't want to add more sewage into the river, especially until people start figuring out where all they're building. So I'm going to keep it tied to what Zardus has already initiated, along with power, because I don't really want to put a power plant here because I'm a little bit concerned about pollution where it's going to go. I end up setting up some industrial later that's a little bit above the railroad area. I try to keep the industrial area as condensed as I can, and it doesn't look like the wind is necessarily going to affect a massive area, but it is something to keep in mind. I'm trying to factor in, people adding to this and stuff like that, and not try to make a massive area of pollution, although I'm sure they would just work around it as best they could. So we're going to, again, utilize the sewage systems Zardus has already set up. We're going to go ahead and connect power to the lines that are already in place without setting up a power plant. And I figured down the road, we'll probably start adding some things to accommodate a little bit of this later, as people begin to build and set up. I just don't want to restrict anybody from building a certain area because, I've created a pollution monster somewhere. So once we get power connected, we're all set up to begin adding in some zoning. Finally, we can get our city kind of running and operating in the way we need to. Obviously, we had a lot of infrastructure work to do between the highways and setting up our downtown area, but we are off to actually populating this space. We're going to start off with some medium density residential closer to the edge of the downtown. We're also going to be throwing in some mixed use zoning. I find this is like one of the best zones to use in smaller areas. Like if you want to limit the units that you take up, the mixed use is just great for filling in spaces because the buildings typically connect to one another. So it tends to look very smooth when you're setting it up. And I like being able to control that a little more, especially when creating like sort of fades from lower parts of town to some of those buildings that have a little more elevation to them. We'll be putting some of our lower density commercial tied on some of the main arteries and some of the roads where you just expect, smaller buildings or gas stations and stuff like that, shopping centers just attached to main avenues and stuff, especially near the highway. And tied into some of the industrial we'll set up a little bit later. Now, I think I mentioned this earlier. One area that I'm just not sure what to do with is this space along the coastline. This sort of awkward little shape here. I don't know what to make out of this, but I think I'm going to set up some sort of road and then have a few row houses down here. And then we may just need to do some pedestrian pathing later to make this look like something, a little neighborhood, I guess. I'm just not really sure what to create in this space. So if you have some ideas, let me know down below. Obviously, we could put a port here potentially or something along those lines, but I don't know if that's really what I want the space to be taken up by. I thought I would like the pedestrian road down here a little bit more. I ended up switching it to an alleyway later. I just don't feel like the pedestrian road feels like much of anything. It just doesn't have a lot of detail to it that makes it stand out in some way. I'm not really sure why we don't have like an option of brick or something like that sort of embedded in this. I think that would look at least a little bit more like catchy, it'd have something to it. I'm going to keep the roads kind of basic in this space, but we're going to go ahead and set up row housing. And again, I switched the road to an alleyway a little bit later, but I want to see what this ends up looking like. I don't think it's gonna be that interesting. I think we're gonna have to kind of do some brainstorming about how we can make this look a little bit more interesting, a little bit more prepared. And some of that's just because we're using zones, so we do have some limitations. If it was plopping down assets, I think I would set this up very differently. I might even try to incorporate some of the row houses like really close to our wall and stuff like that. So maybe I go back and redo the space to sort of accommodate that somehow, like this idea I have in my head, but I just don't think it's still very much to fill in the area. It would be cool also to have like a thicker pedestrian path that I could put closer to the water, like somewhere between pedestrian paths as they are now and the pedestrian road, maybe, to set up that space. But I guess at some point we'll have more options. It just, nothing seems to really work out the way I had intended here. So we're going to start with this, see how it goes, and we'll go from there. We can always add trees, but trees don't necessarily fix everything. I mean, I'm a big fan of utilizing textures to create some opportunities. You know, wild like brush and stuff like that could be really interesting here. Hopefully those are things we get in the near future. I'd like to see some options, more options attached to what we can already do in game. But, you know, I think we're all experiencing that little bit of limitation, especially if you played Cities 1 with mods or any assets attached to it. We're running into some of the walls we have now with Cities 2, which is sometimes a little bit frustrating. But we know that like this is a significantly different platform to build off of, right? So I'm curious to see where the game goes here in the next several months as we get closer to having mods and assets available. I am hoping that we still have some of the same freedoms that we had in CS1, at least over time. We, you know, begin to get some of those. Now you can see we already have some medium density buildings cropping up and some mixed use buildings popping up as well. So we're going to feed that a little bit, but you can tell that our medium density demand is gone. And this is where we start getting into a little bit of the slow build of the city that I started to witness. The high density demand is really just the lower income demand. So I need to incorporate that somewhere, maybe just to accommodate the demand meter. And I'll keep that pretty limited once I do add it. Now, to continue to feed some growth, we obviously need to incorporate a little bit of low density residential. So I'm going to set up a basic neighborhood here, separating the downtown from the highway. Now, it would not surprise me if down the road I actually redo this area to be more in line of like medium density, tucked in beneath the highway as we begin to fill out the city. That's something that I've been doing some in my other build, Cedarburg, that I mentioned before, is upgrading the city as we progress. So I'm finding opportunities where I just lay down that low density residential, I cover demand, get the population up, and as the city continues to evolve and grow, that's when we begin to incorporate a little bit of an evolution in areas. So low density begins to turn into medium density or high density, and you continue to see the downtown push some of that low density buildings out, and then we actually create suburbs that are a little bit more refined and better looking. So right now I'm not too concerned with how this looks. I'm just getting the zones down, and I'm going to push it as close to the highway as I can get, and then I'm going to smooth out the terrain obviously, and just make this look like a buffer between the highway and the city. But again, I intend to probably go back and redo this space to accommodate bigger buildings. That way, the highway begins to look like it's running through a city almost as we continue to expand and grow this area. And I know what we're going to end up getting down to is basically low density residential demand and industrial demand. And in fact, it ends up almost just turning into straight up industrial demand. This is something in retrospect I should have accommodated a little differently. But like I said, by the end of the episode, I end up fixing a lot of this and balancing it out. It just took a minute. And we set up some education infrastructure to help move the city along. And by the city, I mean the whole map along to hopefully get to a point where we can start bringing in offices and stuff like that a little more consistently. Because right now it's just, you know, it doesn't seem existent for what I'm setting up here. I'm going to go ahead and start taking up some of downtown with low density residential as well. And again, we'll upgrade this over time because it won't really match up very well if we start putting in high density. I'm trying to be aware of our budget. So I don't want to go too overboard with adding all the services here at once. We're going to get the clinic in, and I'll start to add some of the other items that we need to here so that we're not waiting on some of these services to take the highway to get here, you know, improve response time a little bit. So I've gone ahead and I've smoothed out some of this terrain off camera, and I also unlocked our trains so that we can go ahead and adjust this railway and elevate it. And now we're going to bring this road up a tier so that we can begin that little industrial park area. I'm going to smooth out some of this, make it kind of flat. Again, it's going to be just another tier in the overall city. And I don't necessarily expect this to stay this way. Like I'd like to move the industrial further away. I just don't know when that's going to happen. I don't see it happening in this episode, obviously. So we're going to set it up here and see how things begin to develop, and we'll go from there. It's also entirely possible that someone else, you know, builds enough industry to cover more of the city. Like maybe we can convert this later into offices as the city continues to evolve. One other thing I need to do is go ahead and get a school down so we can start working on education infrastructure. That's going to be the first step to what we're going to apply on this side of the river to accommodate that. Now, I'm not going to really worry about a high school. We have one on the other side of the river, but there's just not enough demand for that right now. And, you know, as you guys probably have seen when you're playing Cities 2, there's just not much demand for high schools in general. So I've added a little bit more commercial space to the city. We're going to go ahead and start putting down a little bit of industrial, just start to feed that and see how it goes. Intermix will have some more commercial up here as well. It's just going to be kind of packed tight right now into this space. We also need to get some road services up so that we can accommodate those potholes, hopefully reduce wrecks and stuff like that in the city. I'm going to add that, and you can see these vehicles are going to start flying out to do their job, which is pretty helpful. I also really like that asset as a building. I think that's pretty neat. So real quick, we're actually going to make another subdivision that is going to be on an elevated tier, once again between the highway and some of the downtown infrastructure, but it's going to fill up a little bit of this sort of empty space that's existent here in this smaller river area that intersects the main river. And I'm hoping that, again, this will continue to accommodate some of the demand without aggressive expansion into more tiles, although we will be probably adding some tile space here before the end of the episode and just prepping to see where this can all go. And then just getting the grid down, we actually level up the city. We hit another milestone. So we're out of Tiny Town. We are now in Boom Town, which is nice. So we're continuing to make good progress for the overall good of the city. Because I am trying to make sure I'm setting up everybody moving forward too. Like we need to hold on to some cash. Ideally, we're still making an income, and there should be some demand needed along with some tiles and some development points so folks can continue to move the city in the right direction beyond just what I'm going to do. I could be really selfish and just use all the development points, I guess, but I don't think that's very ideal. This road and how it was sort of bumpy, and try to get this cleaned up. And then I'm also going to smooth out some area near the road to the bottom of this little subdivision so that we have some space for some commercial shops, maybe just right outside of the neighborhood. I can actually go ahead and add the fire station here because we have this little bit of a pocket of room to add a couple of things. And I'm going to have this road actually bend around and underneath the highway, I think, so that it sort of connects the downtown area to the industrial area with another route, so they don't necessarily have to use the road running beneath the highway that we already set up. So there's some options there for traffic flow. Now, I think based on what we have set up, we're in pretty good shape to see where things go. And I may need to do a little bit of a jump ahead to show you guys some of the progress that I make, because it does take some time to start shifting the direction the city's going. Because you can see some of the medium density buildings are now abandoned and we have very little demand. It's just residential and industrial, neither 100%. I started to get a little bit bored, like I'm waiting for some of that demand to show up, but we ended up kind of figuring it out as we progressed. So now that we have zoomed into the gloomy winter months, let's talk a little bit about demand, because this is something I've discussed off and on in videos. Even in early access, I found some ways of sort of accommodating demand in a way that was productive, right? So if you were running into issues where you didn't have like medium density or high density residential demand and office demand, it tended to be education based, right? So there's 4 tiers of education. You need to accommodate those. Everything from your elementary school, high school, your college, and university as the 4th tier needed to be done. But then there's also other buildings that you can incorporate in your city that boost things like graduation rate and interest in graduation. And of course, something I've brought up in multiple videos that a friend, Toady, actually told me about in early access when I wasn't really thinking about it, was you can incentivize education via taxes because of how residential demand is set up. So there's some options for what you can do to get people into school, which will ultimately help your city health in terms of demand a little bit later. Now, if you're just running into what I'm running into, where you basically just have industrial demand, they're just asking for jobs. And what's interesting here is this is something that I don't see too often when you just wipe out demand entirely by adding in exactly what they're asking for, right? Which it pretty much wiped out all demand. You see a little bit of industrial coming back. And theoretically, what I'm hoping for is that by accommodating enough industrial, we'll get that demand up for residential. Because again, what's happening is that there is already a city built on this map. So folks can be moving into what Zardis has already set up without really needing anything new here. So I'm having to balance everything across the board, not just what I've built on this side of the river. Now, quickly, you can start to see some of our medium density demand going up, which is great to see. We finally have a little bit of an increase there. That's the nice thing about cities too, is I've noticed it's very reactive to what you are doing, whether you're setting up new zoning or you're just trying to see what effect it's going to take place. You tend to not have to wait very long to see that effect, which is great. Now, I want to go ahead and get our college added. We've talked so much about demand. I hope that's not incredibly boring, but I think it's really interesting points for new players to understand how you can fix some of that. And what I just didn't take into account was how many folks were going to be moving into the other side of the river, the European side, and maybe not necessarily needing space here. And in that, we have been able to fix it. It just took me a minute to kind of like put it together, like what was really going on. And that's just my oversight. So I'm going to go ahead and expand our downtown area with a couple of tiles. I'm going to move the power line to just match the tile edge for now. I'm sure this will be changed as we continue to progress, but I'm not really stressed about it. I just want to get it a little bit more room added to the city without changing a ton of our infrastructure for right now. So we've unlocked the college using development points, and I'm going to actually place this on this upper tier and set up a very small campus, something that I've enjoyed doing off and on in my own builds. But this is going to serve this side of the river. I'm actually going to leave it so that it doesn't serve just this district. So if folks want to make the highway trip over here, they can. We may change that later as the European side continues to develop. We'll see. But I'm going to go ahead and put this down on this elevated area. I'm going to go ahead and add parking lots as well, just to make it feel a little bit more like a college campus versus just a building. So we're going to go ahead and unlock parking lots. Again, we got to use some of these development points for some stuff that will be used sort of repeatedly through the city anyway. I do love that parking lots have been incorporated in cities too. I think I've brought this up a couple of times. It's probably one of my favorite things that is just in base game cities too. The ability to put parking lots down, I feel like is almost a detailing element to me. It's something that I incorporate in a lot of my downtowns. And as I've started to use things like developer mode, to make almost like parks and squares in between buildings in my downtown area, I start to add in more parking lots and sort of feature them in a way off of alleyways and stuff like that, interwoven with buildings. And that can be a really nice touch for some of the stuff you're building, especially when it comes to your downtown or like midtown type spaces. Not to mention alleyways are really great for creating like suburban roads in some spaces too. If you want something that's not as wide as your base road, you can use alleyways to create roads for suburbs and residential areas. And I think some of those little things, like little tips when you start to play around with what you do have in cities too, you can create some neat little areas and give your city a little bit of extra flair and customization, which is nice. Something I have to keep in mind is that we do need some interconnectivity between the upper tier and lower tier. So I'm going to actually utilize this road to bridge that gap a little bit. This will also give us some room to continue the road that is just beneath the wall up here in a different direction. And I'm actually going to set up a little bit of a grid space for more residential off of this angled road that's connecting the lower and upper tier. Now, of course, I can't seem to drag this just straight across, which is unfortunate. But I do think there's an option to continue that road, maybe at a slight angle or something like that, to continue to expand our downtown lower tier space. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start setting up a little more infrastructure over here on this side of the road to accommodate another subdivision, or at least what will be subdivision for now. So we're going to use the grid tool and we're going to make another small area here to expand what we've already set up. And that'll hopefully end up being another neighborhood. And then maybe, again, we continue to grow it into some medium density buildings and evolve it as the city continues to grow and expand and all that jazz. Much like I intend to do with the downtown area, right? Like we have some residential there. I don't know if that's going to stay there forever. I think some of that will... some of that low density will change and it'll become medium density or high density in some spaces. Like I tend to like to do high density just in very, very specific spots. Like I actually mark those areas so that they fill up spaces between medium density buildings. So you have a little variety. One thing we're going to do, like I mentioned a minute ago, is we're going to use taxes to incentivize higher education. And hopefully this will spur office jobs a little bit later and help with demand across the board, including residential and the high density, medium density, and high density offices. You got to set this up at some point. It takes time for it to really start to convert into that demand like meter, right? Because they do have to graduate. So another thing I want to add to the city is actually a welfare office, which I think tends to help in general with your city health. So we're going to be adding that. But with education, I mean, again, you can incentivize and try to push kids to go to school. You may just take a little bit to see that develop. Now, since we have that medium density residential demand, I'm going to go ahead and add some more spots for that. And we end up unlocking the Polaris Suites, which I'm going to go ahead and place on this angled road that I'll somehow like maybe feature it a little bit better with some pedestrian pathing around it. Because right now it feels a little bit lost, but it takes up an odd space that would have been a little bit more awkward to zone. So let's take some time and actually get a little bit of our downtown to look a bit better, especially fading into some of this low density residential. That doesn't mean we still aren't going to go back and alter some of what's here. I totally expect to take out some of that low density residential and upgrade it later. But for now, I want to go and add a couple parking lots, mix in some mixed use space so that there's a little bit of a more appropriate fade into what we have currently there. I'm also going to use some alleyways to create a little interconnectivity and break up some of just the simple grid we set up towards the beginning. And with that, I'll also be taking out some of our crosswalks to keep traffic flow up as best we can. I may even get rid of some of our street parking a little bit later, maybe in a future episode, so that we don't have quite as many cars just parked everywhere, and, you know, do some wider sidewalks or some trees. And then facing the low density residential, for now, I'm going to include some row homes. I'm not going to do any crazy detailing to these right now, but I think this will help, again, break up some of the height changes from the medium density buildings down to some of the low density residential, and smooth a little bit of that out. But right now, you're starting to see how the city is actually filling in. So it looks like some of the things we've done are starting to take effect, and I'm super happy to see that change. Because like I said, it was getting very, very slow progress for a minute there. I'm glad we were able to sort of revert that into a little bit more of a healthy need for certain things. Sims are moving in, and that is good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start working on a pedestrian path that runs along the coastline here. Now, I imagine this, I sort of envision it with like benches and stuff like that, plenty of trees, and just making it a natural space out in front of the row homes. I still don't know if I love this. This could change later, but for now it'll do. So I'm going to work on some pedestrian pathing that just organically goes around the edge, and you can see it's sort of tailoring to the heights, which I don't really mind right now. I think it looks okay, but it does take a little bit of work to get it sort of polished the way I want. But with some time, I'm able to make something that I think looks okay, and this will tie back to the downtown area. We'll add in some extra lines here and there to connect it to the alleyway. Probably should have put a parking lot somewhere down here as well. Like, this is a space you can just walk along the coast and, you know, take it easy. This is also another area where I wish we had a brick option or something else besides just your pavement street. That would be pretty helpful as well. Maybe we can come back later and add like a dog park or something like that and connect all this into just a big park space. Now, along this angled road we just set up a few minutes ago, I'm going to go ahead and add in some low density commercial to accommodate that little bit of demand. I also just like to place shops on roads like these. It just kind of makes sense. I need to do a better job of diversifying the size of some of those blocks, which I'm trying to do here, so that we have some different types of buildings, because sometimes it can get a little bit repetitive. And then I think I'm going to add some pedestrian paths around the player suites just to make this look a little bit better. It just feels a tiny bit lost right now with just the pathing just sort of ending. Again, developer mode would be ideal here because I can just extend the grass and make it into this whole little thing. But for now, we're just going to use some pedestrian paths and try to clean this up a little bit. And I really do hope that they take the surface mode that's attached to dev mode and make that some sort of feature in game. I don't know how many of you checked that out, but it's really, really handy because you can extend surfaces of buildings. I don't know if mods will interfere with that later down the road, but the ability to sort of extend surfaces or create your own surfaces and how it operates is so much easier, in my opinion, than something like Surface Painter that tended to sometimes like overlap different surfaces that you were placing down, especially like pavement. It would sort of interfere more so than it might help. So you had to use different assets from the workshop to accommodate that. But the surface system in Cities 2 has, I think, a lot of opportunity if it's incorporated in a way that is a little more user-friendly and has a better UI than just using dev mode. Because I know not everyone wants to log into dev mode, and people are probably concerned about their save files, which is totally valid. Luckily, if you keep it very focused in terms of what you're going to use in dev mode, you can tend to avoid a lot of the problems, but that's not necessarily across the board the perfect way of playing the game by any means. So we're going to go ahead and actually unlock the welfare office and get that placed in this city. That'll be a nice benefit to living over here. And we're going to place this out by the college. So theoretically, we could say that maybe this area could turn into something else besides just residential as you move in this direction, at least away from the downtown area. So we're getting to the tail end of our episode here, but I'm pretty stoked with the progress that we made. We were able to get our downtown set up. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on infrastructure, which we had to connect it to the highway system because there was really nothing over here besides that rail line. So we have plenty that we've done, and we've been able to successfully add some demand back into the city. As you can see, the medium densities there and seems a little more persistent, as does the low density residential and commercial. And we do have a little bit of industry that we've added in a pocket there, which hopefully we can upgrade over time, maybe get some offices and some more commercial space added into that area. So it's not just this pocket of pollution that it currently is, but it was necessary to balance things and get people moving in at a little bit better pace. And as you can see, like, I'm putting down medium density and it's immediately taken up, which is lovely to see. Now, while you may have not thought that you were signing up for some sort of tutorial or guide on how to fix your demand, if you are having issues, this is probably a helpful look at what you can do to accommodate it and also balance it and create, some healthy options for what your city can look like and grow by fixing education and doing some simple things. You can really make a prosperous city. So, because we really helped turn around this space pretty quickly, and I'm pretty happy and pleased with the result. And you can see it's filled up quite a bit since we were kind of like struggling to fill in some of the space given what we were at. And I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I hope you enjoyed hanging out, and we're going to end here. You're going to see a little transition, and then we're going to go to what it looks like in winter because it started snowing again, which has been periodic. It's been kind of random. There's some traffic in the city that clears up off camera, thankfully. I did a little investigation. It was just an influx of people moving in. So don't worry about that. Next episode, which will be on Teddy Radko's channel, and check the community tab for more updates and things. And there will be a playlist associated with all the videos for 5B1C in this season. So hope you guys enjoy. Take care, and see you next time.